Hey, hello everyone, I'm David Guerrero and welcome back to another video here on Many Ways Films. When I started to be interested in photography and video, I went to YouTube like anyone would do when you're trying to learn something new. It doesn't matter if it's cooking, if you're trying to learn about cars or uh, clothing, anything really, you go to YouTube. That's pretty much where most of us or anyone who's learned or is into photography or video has gone. At least that's what my experience was. I am very particular in how I learn things. I'm a very visual person, and even that I like to listen to things and I like to listen to the instructions. I like things to be very specific. The other day I was trying to install something on my car, and I've done it before, but this was a different car and there was no videos on how to do this install in these specific cars except one, and this one video was very it just went over the top of things, so I wasn't really able to do it or follow step by step. And that's what I want to do in this series of videos that I'm gonna be doing. This one is gonna be specifically on what I'm gonna be talking, what the videos are gonna be about, and I'm thinking I'm gonna be showing you how I do things, but also what the overall or the most common rules are and why sometimes I don't follow those exactly. And this might give you not just the understanding on how to do things or how they're supposed to be, but also know, because I'm always curious, like, if that's how things are, why do the people that know more sometimes don't do them that way? And I think it's important to have the base, because you don't want to be all over the place. You want to know when you can change something and when you cannot change that thing, and you have to use another setting in the camera or around you, move things around to make things work. If you are like me, you are probably thinking of getting a camera. Nowadays there's the option of having a DSLR or a mirrorless. You can also use your phone as a professional camera, and by professional I don't mean that you're gonna get professional results. You can get into apps. Most of the times you have to pay for them. At least I think it's just a one-time purchase, and you can have your phone and change the settings like shutter speed, ISO, and aperture. I think that's a possibility to do nowadays with some apps. If you already have a camera, it doesn't matter if it's from 2010 or even before then. Most, if not all of what I'm gonna say works in cameras from this day up to 15 or 20 years back. So they should work the same way. I mean, cameras have changed a lot, but they all follow the same principles. I have very old SLR here that requires film. In any DSLR or SLR or mirrorless camera, cinema cameras, except for GoPros, action cameras and all that stuff, and handycams, sometimes you can change or use some of these options. But if you haven't bought any camera, I would recommend to buy a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, depending on where you are right now. And I'm gonna be talking more about cameras, my opinions, but pretty much any camera you have that has a interchangeable lens and can take pictures and video, or video depending on what you're interested, is gonna work for what I'm about to say. Once you have your camera, you're probably gonna get a kit lens. Kit lens are mostly described as the lens that comes with the camera when you buy it, because it's a very very affordable lens, which it doesn't always mean that it's a bad lens. It just means that, you know, it's affordable. And yeah, you're probably gonna get more imperfections in those lenses. I'll talk about more about that in the future. So if you're able to get a lens with the camera, you can use the kit lens, or you can buy a lens. Now I feel like DSLR lenses are pretty affordable, especially prime lenses, and they're really good for learning. I'm gonna talk about that more in the future, but a prime lens, it's just a lens like this that you cannot zoom in or out. I have other lenses right here. Most of the lenses that I have, they're prime lenses. I don't really have zoom lenses. I have some very old lenses, and I have some newer ones. These are smaller lenses. I'm gonna talk about that in another video because it is very important. And I'm mentioning things that I'm gonna be talking in another video, but they're important to know that they're there, and you need to know about those things also. Photography, like anything, it's very wide. There are so many theories, ideas, opinions, facts, if you want to say. And it's a very creative style of art. I think it's one of the biggest ones there is, and my favorite, of course. This one here, it's a zoom lens. It's a little bit old. It's a vintage lens, you know, old. So you can see it gets smaller, bigger, all of that. So this is a 20mm to 80mm, which is really nice lens. Also very old lens. And then I have an adapted lens here. It's a macro lens, which is to see things from very close, and it's adapted to a micro four thirds. Again, I'm gonna talk about that in another video. There's gonna be many things I'm gonna be talking in future videos. This is gonna be probably 4 or 5 videos that I'm gonna make about the very basics of photography and video. They're not the same. The rules don't apply exactly the same way, but they're very similar. They're like cars. That's the closest thing I can think of. There's sports car and luxury cars, and there's so many types of cars, and they all have a purpose, if you can say. They all drive, they can all go fast, they can all stop. You can put your blinkers and, you know, you would think they're the same, but they have different speeds and people use them for different purposes. So that's how it is with photography and video. They're very similar, but they're not the same. Still, most of the rules apply here. If something doesn't apply, I'm gonna be letting you know. The very basic you need to know is that there is an aperture ring. The aperture of a lens is very similar to an eye. If you're on a dark environment, then the part inside of your eye should get big. And that's the same with cameras. If you want to have good light or see better at night, you want to open that aperture so you can see better and your pictures could be more lit up. That's something very basic. Aperture, big, smaller number, 1.8. That's a really big aperture. If it's a big number like 5.6, f8, f22, the number gets bigger, the aperture gets smaller. And I'm gonna focus into the lens. So that's a big aperture right there, which means it's a small number. That's a 1.8 right there. That's an f22, which it means that the number is big and there's not too much light coming into the sensor of the camera. That's a big aperture, small number, 1.8. f22, big number, small aperture. I know it can be tricky and confusing at first, but if you like that really cool background, like right now where the background is kind of blurring, you want to have a big aperture. This lens is a 2.8. It's not as blurry. There's not that blurry background behind me, because this camera has a small sensor. That's something that I'm gonna talk in another video, because there's different types of cameras with different types of sensors. The sensors is what film used to be. You would take a picture like this, try and see at the hole inside the camera, the aperture, and I'm gonna talk about shutter speed also, which is really important, so pay attention in here. What happened right there is that the mirror that it's inside of the camera, it flipped, the film was exposed, light came in for 1/60th of a second, and the picture is now on the film. Things are not like that today. They're very similar. It's very complicated. I don't even understand how pictures are capturing memories today, but they do. It's like magic. So that's why it's easier to explain it with an old camera, because it's the same principle. Whenever you take a picture, the mirror would flip up, the film would be exposed to whatever speed you wanted. That mirror would be up as long as you desired. You could have it for 1/60th of a second, you could have it for 1 second, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. All of those things matter in photography. Again, photography, it's a very creative way of expression and art. There's so many things that you can do when it comes to photography and video. The settings on your camera, like ISO, aperture ring, shutter speed, they will always affect how your image looks, and that's very cool. Like, that's very nice. Like, that's something that I love, because at the end, when time happens and you keep playing with the camera and you're messing with it, and you go outside or you're inside, whatever, you're gonna figure things out. You're gonna realize if your sensor is exposed for a long time, you're gonna have a very bright image, depending on the situation, but most of the time, well, always, you're gonna have a brighter image. But also, your image is gonna have a different look, because you left that sensor exposed for so long that things aren't there anymore. I mean, if there was someone walking by in front of the camera and you left it for 1 second, that person is gone. So the sensor is capturing all of that 1 second of that person walking in front of you. So he's gonna be blurred. He's gonna look like the Flash. If you have a faster shutter speed, like 1/500 of a second, then you're gonna have a darker image. That's why you want to have a flash or some light if you're in a dark environment. But if you're outside and you're doing like sports photography, that works very well, because maybe you want something to stay very still, or not, you want it to have a little bit of motion blur, which means that it looks like it's moving and it's not just stopped right there. So it's up to you. It's up to you, your creativity, your style, your preferences, all of that, on how you're gonna end up taking pictures, and that's what's cool about it. So when I started my first pictures, the first videos, they were a mess, especially video. Video was a mess, and it took a long time, but it doesn't have to take that long if you just, you know, watch some YouTube, watch other people, other opinions, other beginner setting explanations and stuff like that. You're gonna learn, and especially practicing. Take one thing, two things that you learned today, and put them to practice outside. We talked about shutter speed, ISO, and aperture. If you're gonna be using your camera today, I would recommend you play with your shutter speed today. Leave your ISO, go outside. If it's bright, leave it at 1/200 and just play with your shutter speed. You're gonna see how different things look. Trust me, you don't want to have your camera, at least most of the time, you don't want to have it in auto when you're learning. It's fine if it's a special event and you don't want to mess up, but you're outside, you're just exploring, taking your pictures. Don't have an auto. Whatever you do, don't put it in auto. If you do, pay attention to what your camera says. It's giving you some ideas, some suggestions on how to do things, but at the end it's a computer, and it's not really, you're not really expressing anything, or maybe you are, but not 100%. So I'm gonna be making more of these videos. Today was just a little introduction about things. I'm gonna be talking more about cameras, the difference between sensors and lenses, also about settings in camera, what works best for what situation. These are all in my experience. There are my opinion based on other people that I watch growing up on YouTube, my own personal experience, again, work, and just what I learned over the years. So don't forget to subscribe. I would really appreciate it. I'm gonna be uploading this weekly, so there's probably gonna be one next week, if not by the end of this week. So thanks again for watching, and any questions, please leave them down here, because I'll be really happy to talk about those, and I'll see you in the next video. See ya.